Hello friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Anurekhachari Wagh, Assistant Professor, Department of Sociology, Savitribai Phule, Pune University. Today we are going to discuss the module Green Revolution Part 2. This module is part of the paper Agrarian Social Structure and Change that is coordinated by Dr. Manish Thakur of IIM Kolkata. In this module titled Green Revolution Part 2, we are going to have a thorough critique of Green Revolution. Especially we will look into the socio-ecological implications and impact of Green Revolution. Because of this socio-ecological impact, we will also discuss the new agricultural strategy that is followed by the Government of India. Further, by looking at the socio-ecological impact, we will also raise questions with regard to capitalist farming that is being encouraged through the policies of Green Revolution. Because of this negative critique of Green Revolution, we also have to rethink whether now, given the context of the whole issue of food security, do we need a second Green Revolution? Negative aspects of the Green Revolution. So far, one has only heard about the positive achievements of the Green Revolution, but as students of society and culture, you may be aware that most of the phenomena have anticipated and unanticipated consequences. They have positive payoffs as well as negative consequences. Some of the negative consequences could be unintended. In this module, we will talk about the negative impact of Green Revolution. All these negative effects become evident gradually and have been of an enduring and an irreversible nature, especially in relation to ecology and social structure in India. Since the 1960s, Green Revolution has been hailed as a successful intervention in India and China in redeeming the hunger of millions of people. But Vandana Shiva tells us that the Green Revolution has had a devastating impact on our ecology, which is in turn going to affect our sustainability in the long run. Ecological impact. Green Revolution has been widely criticized for causing environmental damage. Some of the predominant forms of damage have been the deterioration of soil quality, depletion of groundwater resources, poisoning from fertilizers, pesticides, and loss of genetic biodiversity. Like all commercialized agriculture, Green Revolution has reduced the natural fertility of the soil. The high-yielding varieties usually grow faster as a result of 2 or 3 crops could be grown in some regions, but this was often at the cost of fertility of soil. The traditional practices of keeping the land fallow for a season or for planting another crop to retain the nutrients in the soil are done away in order to fulfill the goal of higher productivity. For example, Vandana Shiva, in providing a critique of Green Revolution, says that in Punjab there was considerable crop diversity. About 41% of land was under minor crops like jawar, bajra, pulses, but this gradually declined under Green Revolution. The planting of rice and wheat over and over again, along with a heavy dosage of fertilizers, narrowed the genetic base of the crops, creating serious ecological problems in Japan. Further, doing away of soil building like pulses, soya bean, etc., robbed the soil of its natural fertility. The re-engineering of the draft variety of the so-called miracle seeds has reduced the availability of organic matter into the soil, and the increased use of fertilizer for the new seeds has built up soil toxicity, causing a reduction in the micronutrients. The traditional varieties of the rice yielded a lot of straw, whereas the high-yielding varieties increases the grain at the cost of the straw, affecting availability of fodder and nutrients for the cattle. In other words, this science-based agricultural strategy led to a gradual decay of the organic system that had been in place for centuries, affecting the ecological balance of the region in the long run. The excessive use of fertilizers and pesticides during the Green Revolution polluted waterways, poisoned agricultural workers, and killed beneficial insects and other wildlife. Intensive irrigation practices led to eventual abandonment of some of the best farming lands. Groundwater levels are retreating in areas where more water is being pumped for irrigation than can be replenished by the rains. Some of these outcomes were inevitable due to the use of modern inputs for the first time. Further, inadequate extension and training added to the nature of input pricing and subsidy policy that made modern inputs look too cheap, also encouraged excessive use of creating a long-term negative environmental impact. The Indian farm scientists had been recommending the use of miracle seeds for farmers on the basis of national level demonstrations in farmers' plots, often ignoring the micro heterogeneity characterizing agriculture. Sophisticated technology often calls for specific details, but according to N.S. Jodha, it is often the lack of means and mechanisms which stands in the way of scientific farming. The environmental specific character of high-yielding variety seeds have been long ignored. Studies show, as Jodha reiterates, that unless long-term safeguards are introduced, a rush for new technology in areas dominated by high-yielding variety seeds may actually accentuate the resource depletion process, and the Green Revolution may prove to be an ecological misadventure. A series of problems result apart from a reduction of the world's genetic diversity of crops brought on due to a concentration of a few selected variety of crops. A narrow genetic base of high-yielding variety makes the crops susceptible to disease and crop failure. Genetic erosion of cereals poses a long-term problem as the basic stock is gradually denuded and subsequently lost. To add to it, an imbalanced use of fertilizers has caused toxicity and a decline in the production. In fact, prolonged and increasing use of chemicals has interfered with the biological and cultural control measures against pests and diseases. Thus, in addition to the macro-level institutional factors, the high-yielding variety seeds themselves have been responsible for creating poverty due to its environment-specific character in certain regions as compared to others. In fact, Vandana Shiva tries to argue that there are hidden social and ecological causes which underlie the ethnic and political conflicts that characterize Punjab today. The Green Revolution has left the once prosperous state ravaged by violence and ecological scarcity. The problem in Punjab, she says, should not be merely understood as a conflict between two religious communities, but reflect the cultural and social background and tensions between a disillusioned farming community and a centralizing state which controls agricultural farming, policy, finance, credit, inputs, and prices of agricultural commodities. This attempt to introduce new technology can be regarded as a planned destruction of diversity of nature and culture to create a uniformity demanded by centralized management system. Socioeconomic impact, new agricultural strategy, and increasing regional disparities. As a result of new technologies in agriculture, Dutt and Sundaram say that the farmer has become more market-oriented. This meant an increasing dependence of the farmer on the market for both inputs like fertilizer, pesticides, and new high-yielding variety seeds, as well as for the selling of the output. The demand for agricultural credit also increased simultaneously as the cash requirement for the farmer increased. Modern technology proved a superiority over traditional technology, but this was primarily in areas where enabling conditions prevailed. Regions like Punjab, Haryana, and Western Uttar Pradesh, which were well endowed with resources, benefited the most from the new technology, whereas other regions remained backward and underdeveloped. This Green Revolution has led to an increase in regional disparities. A sharp fluctuation in outputs of cereals since the introduction of the new strategies show that though on one hand the maximum and minimum total outputs are now much higher than the past, the output of cereals are still subject to vagaries of the weather. Another consequences of the Green Revolution spread only in irrigated and high potential rain-fed areas was that the poverty in other areas where the potential of rainfall was low has rarely improved as compared to the areas which were rain-fed. Although the villagers living in the areas with rural rainfall tried to acquire some indirect benefits through migration, cheaper food, these were rarely sufficient to prevent a widening of income gaps between them and those who lived in the areas which received higher rainfall. Studies also mention a worsening of regional inequalities in China as well, increasing the divide between the small and the big farmer. The new agriculture strategy entailed heavy investments beyond the capacity of the small and medium farmers. According to estimate, only 6% of the big farmers among the total number, who held about 40% of the total land under cultivation, could make heavy investments in the new technology. Hence, these big farmers benefited the most partly by mechanizing and partly by multiple cropping, wherein they included profitable commercial crops. A large majority of rural households who did not own land or finances and therefore did not have the credit worthiness did not go in for the new technology. Thus, in a way, the adoption or non-adoption of technology managed to reinforce the difference between big farmers who own more than 20 acres of land and small farmers, tenant cultivators who were numerous and yet too marginal to agriculture. In addition, small farmers were also affected by lower product prices, higher input prices as a result of Green Revolution and efforts by landlords to increase rents or force tenants off the land. According to Hazel, some critics also argued that Green Revolution encouraged unnecessarily mechanization, thereby pushing down rural wages and employment. Although a number of village and household studies conducted soon after the release of Green Revolution technologies lent some support to the early critics, most recent evidence shows mixed outcomes. Small farmers did lag behind large farmers in adopting Green Revolution technologies, yet many of them eventually did adopt them. Many of these small farmers adopters benefited from increased production, greater employment opportunities, higher wages in the agricultural and non-farm sectors. In some cases, they proportionately gained in terms of resulting in a net improvement in distribution of village income. But it is largely the wealthy large landowners who benefited. These commercial farmers were able to exercise an influence on the government, which in turn relied on them for political backing and support. There was a distinct bias which was evident in the fact that subsidies and investment were concentrated in areas that had already seen success and advancement, and there was usually not much left for the agrarian communities that needed state support. In the 1980s, even as the gains of the Green Revolution were consolidated, subsidies for agricultural inputs continued to increase so much so that these agricultural subsidies have become an enormous burden for the state government. Fujita also reiterates that since these subsidies are mostly given to wealthy farmers in agriculturally developed areas, necessary public investment for agriculture and for rural areas is neglected, which causes the disparity between advanced rural areas and backward rural areas to remain fixed. In other words, Green Revolution was responsible for further deepening of the capitalist farming methods in agriculture. The process of commodification had begun during the colonial times, leading to a semi-feudal, semi-capitalist agrarian form, but no development of Indian agriculture or changes in production relations had been initiated even after independence. Green Revolution was carried out on such a base, and hence its benefits remain skewed, bypassing institutional reforms in Indian agriculture. The new Indian agriculture strategy did not recognize the need for institutional reforms in agriculture. The bulk of the peasants were without any ownership rights. Besides, there was no fixity of tenure, and large-scale evictions also followed as landowners increased the rent of the land and cultivators could not pay it. Thus, tenants were forced to accept the positions of the sharecroppers. In a study cited by Dutt and Sundaram on the effects of crop sharing arrangements in the fertilizer use, it was found that cost of the fertilizers was met generally by the cultivators by borrowing, and interest charges were rather high. Therefore, owner farmers reaped the maximum amount of profit, a relatively lesser amount was reaped by the tenants, and the return was even further reduced at the level of the sharecroppers. The Green Revolution and the hope generated by increasing productivity quite easily bypassed the need for land reforms. Therefore, the benefits of technological changes could not be equally accessed by all. Instead, it contributed to a widening of disparities in income between different regions, between small and large farms, and between landowners on one hand and landless laborers and tenants on the other. Mechanization and displacement of labor. There are very few studies which assess the impact of mechanization as a result of the Green Revolution, leading to the displacement of labor. The Green Revolution introduced both biological innovations, those which lead to changes in the productivity of land, and mechanical innovations which refer to the use of labor-saving technologies. It is a net effect of both of the above which will determine the extent of displacement of labor. However, mechanization leads to a dampening of the demand for labor, and hence some scholars felt that policies that encourage premature mechanization and surplus labor economies such as India do not seem to be conducive to solving the problem of growing unemployment. In an attempt to quantify labor displacement as effects in the wheat growing areas of Punjab as an effect of modernization, Billings and Singh showed that 55% of the total labor displaced was expected to be caused by tractors and pump sets and 37% by threshers and reapers. That was increased as technological changes gathered momentum. Another impact of farm mechanization was highlighted by Dhanagre, who mentions that the effect of farm modernization was quite damaging because of the number of accidents that the farm workers met during the course of using such technology. A majority of such incidents occurred when farm worked on wheat threshers. Dhanagre provides several such estimates and accounts in his work, but mentions Punjab as a special case because in the 12,000 village of the state there were about nearly 12 lakh farm machines of different types, mainly wheat threshers and combined harvesters. According to an estimate given by him in a year alone, that is in 1985, nearly 1,000 farm workers in Punjab, Haryana, Western UP lost their limbs in thresher accidents. Most of the victims were invariably migrant labor. In 1985, more than 10,000 farm laborers from Bihar, Orissa, UP had been maimed while working on such machines. The attitude of the government towards the treatment and rehabilitation of such workers was one of pure ambivalence. The implementation of Workmen's Compensation Act of 1923, whereby the farm laborers were to be insured while using this machine, or as regards the receipt of compensation from the government, left a lot to be desired. Few terms of trade: agriculture versus industry. One of the important forms of debate that characterized the Indian intellectual, social and planning circles during the years of Green Revolution and even after was whether the state ought to pay more attention to agriculture or industry in a newly independent nation. In the context of a policy framework infused with Nehruvian thinking, while large sections of India lived in villages and their needs had to be catered to, the future of India lay in rapid industrialization. In an attempt to catch up with the rest of the world, as India invested in heavy industrialization, there was a relative neglect of its rural economy, especially since its second five-year plan. But as two consecutive droughts attacked India in 1960s and agriculture recorded a negative growth, India faced a food problem. Since the share of agriculture in the economy was quite substantial, it affected both economic development as well as the stability of the political regime. It had to import large quantities of food, mainly wheat, from outside for over 2 years. It also had to import chemical fertilizers and agricultural machineries necessary for the development of agriculture. This was a bitter cost that India had to pay for neglecting its rural sector. Although the Green Revolution in the subsequent years made India self-sufficient in matters pertaining to food, it brought home a lesson. According to Fujita, the most important lesson we learned is that agricultural growth should precede modern economic growth based on industrialization. In early stages of economic development, agricultural sector is quite huge, and at this stage, if the government promotes industrialization at the cost of agricultural sector, it is sure to fail because there is lack of market for non-agricultural sectors. The existence of a domestic market is essential for industrialization. Therefore, the key to raise income and alleviate poverty, which is widespread in rural areas. Hence, attention to agricultural development should be prior to industrial growth and development towards a second green revolution in India. Today, India is in the throes of a peculiar crisis as far as its agrarian sector is concerned. While the impact of green revolution is still being felt in the form of increasing agrarian distress leading to impoverishment and farmer suicides in different parts of the country, there is almost simultaneous effort to create a consensus for a second green revolution in our country. Both groups offer strong and compelling arguments to support their respective positions. Vasavi has shown how green revolution modern of agriculture has affected the social, economic and ecological aspects of a region, creating a crisis of identity, knowledge, resources among farming community which is affecting their survival. Matters have been made worse due to the neoliberal policies of development, as farmers have now come to depend on large agribusiness for their seeds and loans, and even knowledge and advice of what is to be grown on their fields rather than their own stock of knowledge accumulated through experience of working on their land and soil. This has reduced the farmers to a state of advanced marginality, leading them to take their own lives. In fact, Indian villages in Punjab are for sale as rural indebtedness mounts and the people migrate to urban centers looking for menial jobs. According to an estimate of the National Sample Survey Organization, about 40% of the farmers have expressed a desire to quit farming. This is also perhaps the aim of the national and some state governments in a country who encourage industry-driven agriculture at the cost of subsistence agriculture. For example, Andhra Pradesh Vision 2020 documents speaks of reducing the number of farmers in the state to 40% of the population, but it is relatively silent about the ways of rehabilitating 30% of the farming population that would be driven off the land. The argument on the other side, that is those who favor the ushering of the second green revolution, argue it for the name of an increasing population, which would eventually lead to an impending food security crisis. They feel that some of the problems of the first green revolution could be rectified without much yield loss through policy reforms and improved technologies and management practices such as pest-resistant varieties, biological pest control, precision farming, and crop diversification. The Government of India has signed the 1,000 crore new agricultural knowledge initiative with the United States of America, which would enable a transfer of genetic engineering technology, investment in the field of agricultural research, training, and irrigation methods. In other words, this marks a reiteration of the faith in the capacity of technology to provide a resolution of the limits posed by nature or even by human intervention. Thus, the main thrust of the second green revolution will be to increase food production by using genetically modified crops. A transition from primary agriculture to secondary is seen as necessary to tackle poverty, endemic hunger, chronic malnutrition by enhancing agricultural production. This time, the revolution that seeks to target the small and marginal farmers, about 93% of the total agriculturalists who were left behind in the first attempt. There are no easy solutions to the problems posed by the demands for a higher agricultural productivity or for the government's role in reposing faith in technology once again to redeem the condition of the masses. But probably we cannot forget that the two major costs that we incur in the bargain. The first is the limit posed by nature and our capacity to sustain life on earth, and the second concerns the so-called beneficiaries of such initiatives. In other words, who benefits and at whose cost in this process of social engineering. This should give us a realistic understanding of all the interventions that we undertake in the name of human development. Students, in this whole module or titled Green Revolution Part 2, we have looked into the negative impacts of green revolution, especially its implication in terms of feasibility of second green revolution that is to be ushered in within India. Because of the kind of impact green revolution has on not only the society but also the ecology, we need to rethink green revolution in the context of agrarian distress. This agrarian distress, as we all know, is manifested especially in terms of three very crucial ideas. First, that is increasing impoverishment, 2, increasing indebtedness, and 3, very unfortunately, increasing number of farmer suicides. Given all this, we need to rethink our strategy of green revolution. Thank you.